Now, he says God is high, and God is the high and the lofty one who inhabits eternity, declares the prophet Isaiah. He declares no such nonsense at all. The King James Bible declares that God inhabits eternity. The word has to do with the future. But exactly how are we to understand the notion of eternity is not clear. Well, that's obvious when you read all of their writings, that is not clear to them. But traditionally, the Christian church has taken it to mean timeless. But in this classic work on the subject, Oscar Cullmann has contended that the New Testament does not make a philosophical quantitative distinction between time and eternity. It knows linear time only. That means where it starts and it goes, and you can never back up, and you can never go to the future until it gets here. You see, that's what you mean by linear. He maintains primitive Christianity knows nothing of a timeless God. Well, you're probably right there. The eternal God is He who was in the beginning, is now, and will be in all the future, who is and was and will be, Revelation 1:4. As a result, God's eternity, says Cullmann, must be expressed in terms of endless time. When we speak of God as eternal, then, we may mean either timeless or simply everlasting. The question is, which understanding of God's relationship to time is preferred? The argument all these arguments fall apart. Taking sharp issue with Cullmann's study, James Barr. Now there's a man for it. James Barr is the one I contend with in my paper on is everlasting scriptural. I said, well, this would be, I was going to use a descriptive word, but I won't. Walter's fella, he says, James Barr says, blah, 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 blah. I said, oh, well, if James Barr says, let's fold up our tents and go home. The great James Barr has spoken. This conversation is over. I said, well, what about all these dozens of scholars? And then I quote those that, disagree with Barr. But anyway, so Barr says that the biblical data are not determinative. He argues that Cullmann's study is based too heavily upon etymology, vocabulary studies, and it cannot determine the deciding meaning of a term apart from use. Well, I agree with that. You can't understand everything about any subject by just analyzing all the words that are used in the discussion of a subject. You look at all the definitions of the word, independent of what they say. Just look up the words. You get all these definitions. You can read the dictionary, one definition after another, after another, after another. What does that actually tell you about all those words? Not much. How do you learn about those words more specifically? Use it in a sentence. And thankfully, it's a great aid, most of my dictionaries, they will use the word in a sentence. Here's an example. Oh, forget the definition. Now I see how people mean it, right? So I agree with that. It's not just to look, you don't just look up the definition of a word, although that's important, because you can't have sentence construction if you don't know what the words mean. But you can put together 100 different sentences with the same words and they'll have totally different meanings, correct? So how they're put together is most important. Barr thinks that Genesis may very well teach that time was created along with the universe. Well, I think Barr is wrong. And that God may be thought of as timeless. Barr's basic contention is that a valid biblical theology can be built upon the statements of the Bible and not on the words of the Bible. I agree with that. When this is done, biblical data are inconclusive. Well, I don't agree with that. Okay? So he's saying if you look at it in the most logical way, that is what is actually said about these words or whatever, it's inconclusive. Well, part of the reason I'm giving you this study is I'm going to show you it is not inconclusive. I have learned years ago, there's more than one way to skin a cat, as we used to say back in Pennsylvania. There's more than one way to learn the truths of the Scriptures. And that's what I pray about when I say, God, show me what this means. Show me what this means. Because it's there. The answer to many of these profound questions, it's in there. But you've got to pay attention to the words and the structure and the statements and see that they don't contradict every other word in Scripture in the Bible. So he says, it's then inconclusive. Is such a thing as a Christian doctrine of time has to be developed? The work of discussing it and developing it must belong to, not to a biblical, but to a philosophical theology. Hogwash. According to the Christian doctrine of creatio ex nihilo, you know what that means? Never heard that phrase? Creation ex nihilo. It means everything that is was created out of nothing. Okay? Of course, that's not true. That's not true. So we have another problem. Go to Hebrews 11, verse 3, I guess. 2 or 3. I think it's verse 3. Everything that is seen was made from. Made from. From what? From something. What? Things that don't appear. Things. Are there things that don't appear? Yes. Is God a thing? Yes, God is a thing. I think he's a thing more than he is a person. But, you know, some people fault me for not suggesting that God is a person. But he is something. And the creation is out of him. Jesus Christ came from God, from out beside of God. That's where he came from. He came from there before he came out of Mary's womb. So there is a proof that he existed before. And I have a dear friend who wrote me a rather lengthy letter about that, and I'm going to take that up maybe in another Bible study. You know, can we prove whether or not Christ existed before he was born as a human being? So no, the universe was not created out of absolutely nothing. The doctrine receives philosophical confirmation from arguments demonstrating the absurdity of an infinite temporal, well, yeah, you can't have an infinite temporal, and empirical confirmation from the evidence of the so-called Big Bang model of the universe. If we agree that the universe began to exist, does this necessitate as well the beginning of time itself? The answer is, it all depends. It all depends. If a person believes that time exists apart from events, such that if there was no events, there would be no time, then our argument does not entail a beginning to time. On the other hand, if one accepts that time cannot exist apart from events, then the beginning of events would entail the beginning of time as well. Are you following that? Nope. If time has to do with events only, then you would have no time until you had events. But if it exists independent of different events, then you don't have to have even the creation itself to say that time is there. Okay? In other words, what we're saying here is time predicated on when the universe was made. At the universe we begin time. Before the universe there was no time. Two different ideas. Okay, why is this important to us? Why am I wasting everybody's time going through this? Because it not only has to do with back then, it has to do with up there, the future. Because as God, as they say, inhabits eternity back there, he inhabits eternity up here, and we're going to join him up here, and we're going to be in eternity. All right, but what does that mean? What is it? I mean, is it important? It's important to us to know, first of all, that everybody will be there. That's good, the salvation of all. But then another question is, what will we do for all eternity? This idea that time began only with creation and ends when the creation is dissolved puts us in a perpetual position of total stagnation. Just when you think about this from a Christian theological perspective, think of Han Solo frozen in that bronze type like casket. Frozen there. Nothing happens. Nothing changes. Why? Because God doesn't change. That's a proof that there was no time. See? Because change has to do with events. So they say there were no events before creation. God didn't do anything before creation. He was just like Han Solo, just frozen outside of time. Then he made time, but he's going to do away with it, and we're going to go back to that frozen state again. I don't think any theologian would tell you that, but my thing is, what's the alternative? If nothing changes, then we don't do anything. Because when you do something, that's different from what happened or what was the state of things before you started to do it. That's a change. And if there is no change, we will do nothing. What a damnable doctrine. Swinburne states, for every instant of time must be preceded and succeeded by another instant of time. So he thinks, regardless of whether there are events or creations or happenings or change, there still has to be time. Because wherever you start time, what was there before that period, you know? There had to be a time before. That's what he says, okay? The physical universe itself may have had a beginning, but this can only be true if there is a period of time before the beginning during which the universe did not exist. Of course, this is a philosophical argument. It is not based on Scripture. It's not based on science. But it could be considered, well, yeah, that's a logical argument. But then if you look at the other one, that time is the differentiation from one event to another, from going from one point to another, from something moving from here to there, you see. Well, then that could only happen when you have things that move from here to there and so on. And I would say that happens at creation. So what's the answer? Can we know? Well, I say we can know. Since prior to and after every time there must have been a time since the same instant of time never reoccurs. Time must have gone on and will go on. Although space would not exist without physical objects, time would. But he adds, without physical objects, time could not be measured. Okay? Breaking this down a little finite point. One could not distinguish an hour from a day or a period of time without objects. Therefore, Newton's claims about absolute time would be correct. To say that the universe began to exist in such a time scale would simply be to say that a finite time ago, there was no physical objects. When was there no creation? A long time ago? You see, was there no creation a long time ago? Wait, the Christian couldn't answer. I mean, a theologian couldn't answer that. Well, you're using the word time. You use the word when. When has to do with time. How can you formulate a sentence to question what before creation? I don't know what. What was. Was has to do with time. Now, it is, but it was. There's another time. You say before. Before has to do with time. Something happens now. What happened before? That's a period of time. You can't make up a sentence to even discuss it. And that's why all this stuff contradicts. I love it when God shows me stuff like this. Because I'm not a scholar. I don't know Hebrew and Greek. And, you know, most of these people would laugh me to scorn, you know, with their knowledge and stuff. But I understand principles and concepts and scriptural teaching that most of them don't. And I don't apologize for that. Okay, we're getting near the end of these quotes, but they're pretty important. Ion Hinkfuss also argues that if the universe were frozen into immobility, you know, everything like stopped at absolute zero, there would still be time because temporal duration and measurements are not dependent upon the continuous operation of clock throughout that time.